Hello, listeners. It's Gunter Swoboda here with some exciting news. We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspire Change with Gunter. If your organization cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self development, and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspire Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number 1 in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts to listen and follow in 2024. With an average of 50,000 downloads per episode each week from listeners all around the world, our reach is significant and growing. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spigener-Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Welcome back to Inspire Change with Gunter, where I challenge the conventional, reimagine masculinity, and strive for a deeper understanding of what it means to be a man in today's world. I'm Gunter, and today I'm offering a critical discussion about mental health, masculinity, and psychotherapy. I know it's a bit of a sort of segue from the last couple of podcasts, but stay with me because what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the big picture together with the smaller picture and then the little picture over the next few podcasts. What I want to do is essentially to explore how we can shift away from the overly mechanistic and reductionistic views that have begun to dominate psychiatry and psychology, and instead see the value in embracing a more tailored humanistic approach to therapy and masculinity. So let me address the first question in a sense, and that is, what is the state of mental health treatment currently? My view is that psychotherapy is at a crossroads because we're seeing a clash between two dominant models in psychology, psychiatry, and in medicine in general. On the one side, there's the medicalized view, the view that rests on pathology, and that is treating mental disorders as if they're solely rooted in biology, brain chemistry, or genetics. And you can see that when you jump on YouTube and you start exploring stuff about, anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism. All these things are usually looked through the lens of that, medicalized mechanistic approach. So not only, are we looking for biological explanations, but we also now are looking for biological treatments, especially psychopharmacology. So the emphasis here is often on pharmacology, or if we go into psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, admittedly, both are effective but narrow in scope. And in fact, there are some suggestions that the efficacy of both psychopharmacology and CBT actually has some limitations around it. And having treated trauma for several decades, I can certainly attest to the fact that both psychopharmacology and CBT in dealing with complex PTSD isn't necessarily always that effective. And there's some very good reasons for that, and I could go into those in another podcast. So, one of the things that triggered me to put this podcast together was that I was reading an article in Psychology Today titled "Psychology's Escalating Civil War," and the title of the article really sort of captured my imagination. And in the article, the author argues that from that particular view, we're minimizing the role of personal experience and the context of the person and the deep emotional work that needs to be done. Now, what's on the other side? Well, on the other side, we have a humanistic and psychodynamic approach, which focuses on the deeper emotional, existential, and relational aspects of life, frequently resting on issues about values, morality, and the expression of emotion, and digging deep into releasing, the emotional pain or wound and allowing it to begin to heal. Now, the psychodynamic, the sort of humanistic approaches see mental health not as a mere mechanical dysfunction, but as a complex interplay of thoughts, emotions, and social factors. So let me put this up as a reflection. If I take this into the context of men's mental health, this divide is particularly significant. The reductionist view, reduces men's struggles to simply biological problems, thus reinforcing the stereotype that men are broken or malfunctioning if they don't conform to an idealized masculine norm. Now, my view is that this approach lacks real nuance and fails to consider the social and relational pressures that often underlie men's issues. So, how does making good men great and biological reductionism sit in relation to one another? Here at Inspire Change, and in particularly in my framework of making good men great, I am about more than just treating men's problems with a one-size-fits-all solution. Making good men great is rooted in challenging traditional notions of masculinity, of manhood, by moving beyond reductionist views like the ones currently dominating mental health treatment, like, what's my dopamine level like? Where's my serotonin? All these sorts of very reductionist ideas about well-being. Patriarchy, as making good men great sees it, is characterized by 5 traits: territory, hierarchy, acquisition, competition, and combativeness. My argument is that when therapy ignores the broader context of these forces in men's lives, it risks leaving men trapped in that very, very specific paradigm. Now, the article criticises the over-reliance on biological treatments, which I tend to go along with. It notes that they fail to address the complexity of psychological problems, and in particular, from my position, the psychodynamic issues of attachment, connection, alignment, attunement in relationships, not only with others, but within myself. Now, for me, this translates into a critique of how I approach men's emotional struggles. One of the things that I've always been critical of in CBT, as much as in psychopharmacology, is that the narcissistic wound that we experience as men is frequently suppressed and repressed. Now, both psychopharmacology and CBT does exactly the same thing. It doesn't want us to express our anger, our rage, in order to get into the depth of the pain and therefore to begin to allow the wound to heal. My position is that masculinity cannot be reduced to brain chemistry or biological imperatives. Instead, as a therapist, I need to create a space where men can talk about their emotions, where they can talk and express their fears and their desires without judgment. Now, part of this, in Freudian terms, is that there is a time and place for what Freud talked about, which was abreaction, the catharsis of the pain through the expression of anger and rage. Now, obviously, this needs to be taken into context, and obviously, I as a therapist need to be comfortable with my client doing that and have the right boundaries and not get caught in transference and countertransference issues. It's in this contextual view of being, which is what I'm after. So what is it that we need? Well, let me put this under the heading of what we need is more communication and a deeper contextual approach. One of the critical shifts we must make is towards a more narrative and contextual understanding of masculinity. We can't just plonk it into the mechanistic, biological, reductionist realm and expect to get massive change. The Making Good Men Great framework advocates for men to develop networks of support wherein they can communicate more authentically, where they don't need to compete with one another or dominate or control, but build connections that foster growth and healing. In psychotherapy, this means moving away from seeing therapy as a quick fix for symptoms, like anxiety or like depression, and instead focus on the relational and existential struggles that men face. Now, as the article suggests, the therapeutic relationship is central to healing. All the research keeps coming back that it's not technique that make the difference in therapy and in counseling, but rather the therapeutic relationship. Men, in particular, often feel alienated in a world that expects them to suppress and repress their emotions and carry on without seeking help. Men often come to see me and their request is, I need more tools, more strategies, more, skills to deal with what's going on in my life. And I completely lay the groundwork and go, yes, you do. But let's also look at how's your relationship with yourself? And they often look a little bit surprised. And most of them often go, well, I am a bit more critical than I probably need to be. But then we begin to unpack it, and what emerges is a disruption, a disturbance in their attachment relationships with others, but also with themselves. In Making Good Men Great, I align with a humanistic tradition in psychotherapy. And I take pieces, and I try to blend them into something that falls under the banner of neo-humanism or neo-psychodynamic. It's not like Freud, it's not like Jung, it's not like the traditions, it's evolved from there. Feminists have talked about that, in their own field of knowledge about, the need for there to be an adaptation, a growth in the therapeutic models. What I emphasize in my model is the importance of relationship building, firstly with yourself, then with others. It's a process of self-discovery, raising your awareness, And then we communicate tools for healing and personal development. Now, a lot of times that doesn't take, months and months and months. We can do that actually quite rapidly and in parallel to each other. The relational stuff is between me and my client, and how we, shift focus, how we use a different narrative to explain different things. I think that therapy, like masculinity, should not be about fixing broken parts, but rather helping men become more integrated, more in tune with their emotions, and more connected to the people around them. That's where the healing really, truly takes place. So, the path that I'm advocating for is not just about managing symptoms or achieving superficial success. And again, we can argue what success actually really looks like. Is it that you've got control over your anxiety attack or panic attack? Or is it that you live free of that, existential anxiety or that deep-rooted ego anxiety or symptom anxiety? Making Good Men Great, takes it into the realm of transformative power of deep personal growth. Psychotherapy, in my view, when done right, is much, much more about the symptom suppression or repression. It's about fostering an inner flexibility and adaptability that can only come from facing life's challenges head on. Now, there is a Freudian legacy, and the article touches on how Freud revolutionized psychiatry by shifting the focus from purely biological explanations of behavior to psychological ones. Yet today, even when the psychological model's been hijacked by mechanistic approaches, we need to do more. And that's what Making Good Men Great and I am promoting. We need to move even further beyond Freud's legacy to consider a holistic view of men's lives. Freud, in some respects, certainly in its pure form, was, a biological model. In some respects, it was also, in that sense, possibly more reductionistic than we'd like to think. In a holistic view of men and their lives, we need to include their emotions. We need to include their relationships. We need to understand and appreciate social pressures. We need to understand the misinformation that exists within our lives that, makes it appear that we are simply a bunch of biological processes, right? Rather than focusing essentially on our sense of connection and agency, and having a separate sense of values that are not, rolled into, material ideas of success, where we look at, our sense of well-being and the well-being of the people that I'm around. Part of it is shifting our focus away from tasks and more towards being. So if I focus on being first, the tasks that I engage with, whether they be in my own personal well-being or social well-being or my pursuit of my work, my intellect, they become clearer. Real therapy doesn't just give men tools to cope. It helps them to fully understand themselves and take that sense of agency and control of their own growth. So here's the key. We're going to need to move towards an individualized communicative model of therapy. That doesn't mean, we're being individualistic. What it means is that I need to heal in order to be good in that space of we, I and I. Martin Buber talks about this. This is therapy is where we listen to the stories men tell about themselves, about their relationships, and, their society, the community. It's not enough to say men are biologically aggressive because their testosterone's elevated, which, by the way, is not necessarily true. Or that men and women come from different planets. These ideas are outdated, and in my view, quite frankly, they're dangerous. So as we move forward, both in psychotherapy and how we think about masculinity, we need to reject the narrow two-dimensional views that reduce men to mere mechanics. Instead, we need to embrace a richer, more contextual understanding that includes communication, stories, the work between two people or a community, and our emotional growth, how to be more authentic. My vision and the vision of Making Good Men Great offers a view of masculinity that is about greatness, but not in the sense of dominance or competition, but through personal transformation, through support, and a deeper understanding of oneself and, inclusively, others. So thank you for joining me today. I hope that's been stimulating. Some of it may be a bit controversial, and to be frank, good. We need to have more robust discussions. We have a tendency now to simply accept. Education is about, understanding what we're taught. My view is education is about being able to question what we're taught. So if we're going to move forward, we're going to need to broaden our perception of the landscape. Rather than having just a simple two-dimensional narrow view, we need to look towards a much more dimensional, nuanced perspective that we question, that we explore, and that we really literally pick apart and put back together again. Some things we're going to keep, some things we're not. So thanks for joining me today. Take this into your community. Talk with each other. I hope that this conversation has inspired you to think critically about how we can shift our views on both mental health, therapy, and masculinity. Remember, real changes come when we challenge the old paradigms and embrace new, more humanistic approaches. Until next time, stay strong, stay connected, and keep inspiring change. This is me signing off. Till next time. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.